Hey everyone, welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. In the Mobile User Acquisition Show, we talk about how to use mobile user acquisition strategies to grow your app quickly and capital efficiently. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is presented by me, Shamant Rao, mobile growth leader and founder and CEO of the mobile growth consulting firm Rocketship HQ. Each episode includes strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition that you can use to unlock tremendous growth for your app in a sustainable and capital efficient manner. Our guest today is Adam Hadi. Adam is the VP of Marketing at Current. Adam has been a guest before on the show and has also been a guest on our other show, How Things Grow, and we're thrilled to have him back. In today's interview, Adam talks about how Adam has gone beyond Facebook and Google, exploring additional channels, both online and offline. He discusses why they did this and how they account for the complexities of a typical user's acquisition and adoption path. He talks about how they use a mix of messaging and channels effectively to build trust, and how they think about measuring and tracking impact of their channels and messaging in the absence of precisely attributable data. This is very much a masterclass on adapting to the uncertain, unclear paradigm that a transition to offline marketing often entails. Enjoy. I'm very excited to welcome back Adam Hadi to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. Adam, welcome back.
Back. That's really exciting. Wonderful. Yeah. I'm glad the first time around went okay enough to be back.
No, the first time was great. Actually, you're a third time if we count How Things Grow. The first episode we did with you on How Things Grow, that was so interesting and fascinating about how the entire influencer marketing world works. Very, very much of an inside baseball thing. I like that a lot.
Yeah. That was a fun one.
Indeed. As was the last one we did. How you guys are very, very brand conscious and how important that is in ways that I don't think is very obvious to a lot of folks looking from the outside in. And here's number 3. So excited to have you, excited to dive into things that I feel you have such unique insights and perspectives on. So let's jump right in.
It's an honor, Shamant, because I love this podcast. It's the Mobile UA show. It's for us, but really across the industry, this is second to none. It's such a great source of information. I've learned a lot from a lot of the really, really smart guests you've had on here from yourself. So I'm honored to be able to contribute back. Also, How Things Grow. That's a great one. If you guys haven't listened to How Things Grow, check that one out. Actually, the episode we did was with an influencer, Sophie. She's since blown up on TikTok. She does beatboxing. She found this thing. She makes... So it's a cool thing. Go check out How Things Grow as well.
Crazy. And today we're going to talk about things that certainly include how the influencer marketing world, but certainly is more encompassing than that. Let's jump in. The last time we spoke, you said the one big difference between what we do at Current now versus 2 years ago is that if a user signed up for Current 2 years ago, I know exactly how you signed up, which ad you saw, and how you went in, and what was your flow. The attribution was very simple, and that's no longer the case. Can you talk about what changed?
Yeah, what's changed is we've grown. And so when you don't have that many customers and you're not operating on that many channels, it becomes a lot easier to determine, hey, where and why did somebody come in? Now, with a product like ours, and I'll do a little bit of an introduction here to Current, but with a product like ours, we have a very long life cycle, and that introduces lots of complexities in that attribution model. So yeah, what's Current? For those who are listening, we're a mobile bank based here in the United States for people who are overlooked by traditional banks. If you are a working professional, likely if you are listening to this podcast, you're probably decently served by your existing bank, the Chase or Bank of America, et cetera. But for the other half of the country, particularly young people, particularly people who are hourly workers or paycheck to paycheck, that's not the case. They're being charged minimum balance fees, maintenance fees, overdraft fees, literally hundreds of dollars a year. And it's just a completely irrelevant experience to them. That banking product was not built with them in mind. And So enter Current. Obviously, we're far more cost effective as we're online only, app only. And we not just have like a business model that can encompass that, but also have a product that's been built for young people and a brand that's been built for young people and aims to solve their problems. That's who we are. Now, touching back on a bit of what that means in terms of attribution, you, the listener, I'm speaking to you, have had your bank account forever. Banking is a very, very, very high retaining category. I know I've had my bank account for a decade plus, actually. It's just not something that switches very often. You've probably had your bank account longer than you've had an iPhone. It's crazy in terms of the space. So what that means for us is that we now have over 2 million members. That's 2 million people who are out there who've gotten a card, who are swiping every day, who are using it, who are telling their friends, who are paying with their current debit card, who are getting paid and getting notifications saying, hey, you just got paid. You got paid faster. This is great. That's happening now in the world, which creates a little bit more complexity. On top of that, from our customer acquisition funnel, there's a very long consideration phase that goes into it. But even starting at an install is quite a long conversion funnel to where we ultimately want to get you, which is getting your direct deposit. Now, that is something that takes minimum weeks, in some cases months, as we build trust in our customers. If you're paycheck to paycheck and I'm over here asking for your paycheck, what I'm literally doing is asking for all your money, which is a huge ask, because if that doesn't work, you're in trouble. That means you're not eating. You can't get groceries. It's not like you're in position here where you have, oh, well, I'll just dip into these funds or use this card or that card, right? No, it's super critical that works. And so it's a long funnel from both conversion to then usage. And again, that's just starting at install, not to mention consideration. And so for that reason, month, it's pretty complex and a lot more complex than it was. And then you add on to that, us operating on all these different channels, it paints a pretty complex path to becoming a current customer.
Yeah. And you did allude to the fact that you guys are on multiple channels, many online channels and many offline channels. Yeah. From Facebook and Google to the world, to influencers, to out-of-home channels as well. So it's the impression of a lot of people that the vast majority of users are on Facebook and Google. So as a business, how did you make the case for starting to test other channels, including offline channels, and going beyond what could be direct response, directly attributable channels?
Well, I think that you start with working backwards. Where are your customers? Where are they in this world? Yeah. And truth is, Facebook owns an insane amount of people's time in this world. Instagram being a reflection of that as well. Obviously, going into YouTube, going into TikTok, going into all those social platforms, monetize a lot of people's time. A lot of this is dependent on what vertical you're in, obviously. Yeah. But on the spectrum of fully direct response to fully brand, we're somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. I'll give you a sample of how somebody might end up becoming a current customer. You hear about Current from a Facebook ad. It hits you a few different times. So you get an idea that, okay, well, Current's a bank that has some features that could help me. You then see an influencer talk about it, who you watch, and they actually go into detail and you're like, wow, this is actually cool. And it's a pretty cool looking card, something like that. But you're still just aware of it and aware that it solves some of the problems that you have. But are you really going to install the app right now and sign up and verify your identity and do all this stuff? Probably not, because you're a busy person. We're not talking about high intent channels like a Google search or something like that. And then 3 weeks later, midweek, and you get hit with another 2 overdraft fees from Wells Fargo. And you're like, okay, I'm done. I'm making the switch to Current now. How do you attribute that user, right? How does that play in? And I just talked about digital attributable channels. How did the fact that your cousin uses Current and you knew that play into the picture? How about seeing a TV ad, hearing about it on the radio? Because anybody can run a Facebook ad. I saw the Facebook ad, but then when I heard it on the radio, the same radio station I've been listening to for the last 5 years, every single day on this drive, I guess that makes it pretty legit, because not anybody can be on this station. They have to have vetted this somehow. The same, of course, applies to TV. The same also applies to influencers, actually, if not more. That's a really strong endorsement. And so it becomes easier to justify like Asian month because of that customer experience. Now, to take that and let's apply it to a hyper casual game, These are completely different fields. They're almost not even worth comparing. The consideration phase to download a bouncing ball app is about 3 seconds. Ooh, that looks fun. And then you do it. No one's ever seen an ad for a hyper casual game and then searched for it 3 weeks later and been like, yeah, that's what I want right now. Don't get me wrong. It's not like there's just one path to downloading a hyper casual game, because people might, for example, check the app store for games. Like that still might be a behavior that people exhibit, although certainly not as much as they used to. Or again, ask their friends or be like, hey, what's that on your phone? Okay, that looks fun, let me play it. There's different things that you can do there beyond just direct response ads to drive growth is my point. But on the spectrum of customer behavior, something like a hyper casual game is hyper direct response. And something like a bank account is somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, where direct response is obviously important, but not the only thing that matters. On the other end of the spectrum is probably something like dishwasher detergent. No one's ever seen an ad for Cascade pods and then was like, I got to do this right now. I shouldn't say that, because actually now with Amazon, sometimes they get me. I'm checking out and they're like, oh yeah, you got to reload on this. And I'm like, oh, that's true. So actually, I take that back. Even dishwasher detergent right now is somewhat on the direct response spectrum. But if I was going to a grocery store in person to buy it, it would absolutely be in the latter.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of the offline marketing has been driven by knowing and understanding and thinking about where the users are in their lives as much as in their buying journey. Would it be fair to say that when you guys started your growth and acquisition activity, you guys were on primarily digital channels, or were you guys offline?
Oh yeah, 100%. That doesn't make us much different than most startups. I'm not going to name names because that'd be rude, but there is a European fintech who entered the US market with a huge splash, a huge out-of-home splash. If you were in New York the summer before, they were everywhere. They were there across bus stations, billboards, everything. And so that was a little bit of an experiment in some forms of how did that do? Even just looking at the App Store, it didn't move the needle at all. Now, one conclusion from that would be, oh, well, out of home doesn't work. But I think that would be the false conclusion from that. A conclusion from that is out of home doesn't work if people have no idea what your product is or what your brand is or anything else. And for something like banking, it's a nuance. There's a million banks out there. There's a million financial products. Everybody knows these things exist, but why is this one for me? Why is this one? Why am I going to choose American Express or Chase or Current or Citibank or Capital One, or the list goes on? Why would I choose that? So there's a lot of nuance to that, and you can't deliver that nuance via outdoor ads. It's impossible. At least in the category of finance. So you could probably do it in the category of, let's say, fashion. So out of home can deliver other things, but it's not going to drive direct response. It was a fun experiment because rarely would you ever see a company start and enter a market off digital or primarily off digital. But that was an example of it. They were well capitalized in Europe. And so we were able to come here and do that, albeit unsuccessfully. Like most other startups, you're going to start on the lowest hanging fruit, the most attributable channels. And that makes sense.
Yeah. So A, you guys started on direct response channels. B, eventually you moved to offline channels as well, because that's where your customers are. Can you speak to what the inflection was when you guys were like, okay, this is when we need to look at offline? Was there anything in the metrics, anything in the business that impelled you guys to say, all right, this is a time when we got to go off direct response?
It was fairly early on, and it wasn't so much something in the metric. It was more so understanding that trust component. When we would talk with our customers over and over and over again, the conversation always came around trust. And for us, that's a really challenging conversation, because I can sit here and shit on Wells Fargo all day, but they've been around for 100 years. They have a retail location around the corner from you where you can go and talk to real people. There's trust there that would be very difficult for a company like ours that's just a few years old to try to rival. And so that's always been a challenge for us. So our question is, well, how do you fast track that trust? Because we don't want to be around for 100 years and wait to gain it. We need to gain it today. We need to gain it yesterday. And one of those ways is with traditional media. It adds validation in customers' minds. about those channels. And so again, going back to like a gaming example, I don't need to trust Candy Crush. The consequences are not that dire. My mom would say otherwise, given what level she's on. Man, if she ever lost that, it'd be a traumatic event. But functionally, take that leap of faith. It's a small gap that you're leaping over. Whereas in the space of finance, it's this huge gap. And I'm not speaking just in terms of finance. This applies to tons of different categories. It was that realization that then led us down the path. Obviously, we've mentioned influencers a couple of times here. That's another path that we've taken, which has validated that. Our customer, largely Gen Z, for context, they've grown up knowing nothing except for social media ads. And they very much come to distrust them. Just because somebody's running an ad on Instagram, we literally will call those an Instagram brand. There's no faith that that means anything, because anybody can do that. And this is a generation that very much realizes that. And so getting the endorsement of an influencer is something that really matters. Again, something that wouldn't matter in a category like media consumption. It's like, hey, I'll try this free trial. I don't really need to trust that this streaming function will work. If it doesn't work, there's no real consequences.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So it sounds like this decision to go offline came mainly off of talking to customers. And you're like, look, how do we build this trust? And offline marketing will build that legitimacy, will at least make the users perceive you as much more trustworthy than if you were just a digital brand. Again, you guys were digital, and then you started testing offline. How did you quantify in the first time that it was working? And how did you justify that the investment was worth the while? The first time you said, right, we need to build trust. Digital isn't always the best way. Let's do something offline. Maybe that's influencers, maybe that's radio, but I can't measure the ROI off of that. So how did you think about that just the first time around?
Yeah, we're fairly lucky because of, again, the vertical we're in. We KYC customers, that stands for Know Your Customer, meaning that we verify people's identity. So we know their name, we know their address, we know their age, and we know their phone number. All those things are confirmed, which you don't know in a lot of verticals. You maybe know their country and some stuff about their device, but you don't actually know stuff about them. And so that allows us to measure things on a regional basis. Again, this doesn't just exist in finance. While the KYC process doesn't exist, dating is a good example of this. Dating is hyper-regional, hyper-local. And so you can do stuff on a local basis and see local uplift, both digitally and offline. That gives us a degree of measurement that maybe not everybody has, where we could validate things on a small scale. We don't need to run some $10 million nationwide campaign and then measure out lift off of that to understand improvements. It can happen on a very small level, and then you scale it up.
Understood. So you guys started in a local area, you measure the uplift, validate that it's working, and went ahead.
Again, that uplift, it's not just about consumer acquisition. I mean, that's part of it, but it's consumer behavior of your existing customers or people who are in that funnel. And they're like, hey, I did sign up for a current account, but I didn't do X, Y, and Z yet. The bigger your user base, the bigger of an impact you can make there. So a lot of things just don't make sense at small scale that start to make sense at larger scale.
Is that an example?
At this point, again, millions of users, many millions of dollars. When I joined Current, we were less than 20 people, early Series A company. This past fall, we raised our Series C, $131 million. It's just different challenges and different opportunities.
Yeah. So I was asking, is there an example that comes to mind of consumer behavior of your existing users that would have changed as a result of some of the offline marketing efforts?
Yeah, it's conversion right there. Because of the space we're in, it's a little bit different than a lot of other companies in that we have this conversion time frame, this conversion phase, and then this usage phase. And so once you've converted, again, we have extremely high retention. And so there's a million things that affect user behavior in terms of like how much people get paid, how much people spend, where they spend. That's absolutely fascinating. If you're into data, you're into macroeconomic stuff. I remember there was a gaming company I worked with years back that saw its highest spending days were on Fridays. And it was every other Friday was a little bit higher. And it took them a long time to even realize that pattern. Now I look and I'm like, oh, well, that's payday. That's why that's happening. Today, it's extremely obvious because I have access to all that data. And again, just consumer behaviors on the whole. So yes, our advertising on the market, it's not going to affect how much somebody gets paid or where they spend their money, but it will definitely affect. So that's
Understood. And that's how you guys validated your early offline marketing efforts. Can you talk about what your offline mix looks like today and how you measure the efficacy of the offline channels?
We use a few measures. Number one, we use a mobile attribution provider. That shouldn't come as a surprise for our digital stuff. But you move beyond that, we have a how did you hear about us? That's also fairly standard. Fun hobby of mine is comparing those two. That I think tells you a lot. Again, neither are a source of truth, in my opinion. Okay. Both of you tells you a piece of the puzzle. And then you look at uplift. You have uplift both by region, you have uplift by time. Both of those exist. There's pretty well built up models for TV, linear TV at least, when it comes to time-based uplift. But actually, the most obvious examples for us come with influencers. You have some big YouTuber who puts out a video and gets millions of views in a matter of hours. It's not hard to see the difference between what you get attributed and what you don't. Again, the numbers are just so big and so fast in a space like that. But that same principle, again, applies to other offline channels. And then you have your uplift in both conversion or in acquisition and your uplift in conversion in both. Now, that said, this is extremely complex and it's not something that we have an extremely high degree of precision on. There's nuance, there's assumptions. We're constantly refining this. We're constantly looking at this, questioning it, poking it. And at the end of the day, coming up with what's our best estimate. That's what it is. Yeah. It's an estimate, which that's all traditional attribution is either in the mobile space. When AppsFlyer or Adjust tells you that this user came from this network, that's an estimate. We all know that. Yeah. But because it's so definitive, there's a lot of comfort in that determination that you'll eventually forget that, oh, this is actually just an estimate of what we expect based on customer behavior.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And a lot of marketers in mobile have operated, and that's going to change in a world that's very deterministic in that sense. And that's all going to be much more fuzzy going forward. So it's very interesting to hear how you have approached acquisition. So I know you said, look, you're looking at how did you hear about us? You're looking at mobile attribution. You're looking at time and regional based uplift. What happens if all three of them tell you very different things, like wildly different results, maybe even just contradictory results? Is there an example that comes to mind?
Wildly different? I don't know. Yeah. At least not on anything major at any major scale. I think the user level stuff is very interesting in the short term, particularly because of changes. I think take advantage of user level attribution right now, because that may be disappearing for the majority of your customers. But yeah, that may be a case in which, again, looking at survey response, which you have on a user level, and looking at attribution, which you have on a user level, there's contrast there, which I think can really inform your opinion on things like view through attribution, for example. I know that's always a question that people have. And also, every company, every business, every product is different in this regard. We do tons of customer interviews. I mean, an insane amount. I've never been part of an organization that does quite as many. But you really learn a lot from that qualitative feedback in terms of the paths that people take. A better example of this is probably insurance. Because nobody talks about insurance. Nobody knows what insurance anybody else has. There's only so many channels you could have heard this about. And so if somebody tells you, yeah, I heard about this new insurance, let's call it a new product that simplifies this analogy, they're probably right. They're probably not lying on their survey response, not to a large degree. There's ways to control for small variances. But for something that's, again, in our category, maybe you heard about it on Facebook. And so you'll say, how did you hear about this? I heard about it on Facebook. But that's different than why did you download it? Why did you sign up? Why did you convert? And that could be because of our marketing. It could be product marketing, or it could be because my friend told me, or my grandma told me, or my sister told me, or I, again, had heard about it on Facebook, and then it was some separate event that actually made me then go and search for it, click the Google ad, and download the thing. So there's all these complex paths that people take. So be able to compare on the user level your survey response along with your attribution, kind of combine that with the stories that your customers actually tell. And I think you can come up with interesting narratives, which, again, do a better job of reflecting reality.
Right. Certainly, it's not an exact science from everything you're saying. And just to switch gears a bit, you guys still do continue to invest on digital channels. And you did express how a customer decision is a relatively long drawn process. So in many ways, it's somewhat akin to a B2B product, just because that's just that side of a sales cycle.
Yeah.
Considering that a lot of the digital ad tech products optimize for early signals, 1 to 7 days, how do you account for the downstream behavior when you're optimizing your digital channels?
Well, yeah, we have to use predictive events. Otherwise, it functionally wouldn't work for us to optimize even days, not to mention for us weeks. And this is something that it's a little bit of a mistake I often see companies make, where they rely very much so on explicit events that may happen. Something, if we're in e-commerce, it might be add to cart. If it's a game, it might be purchase. Oftentimes, maybe that works. And maybe that ultimately is the best indicator of intent or a good customer or anything like that. Other times, it can be a synthetic event, something that's not explicit, some explicit action that people take. Now, I think a reason a lot of companies start in that first territory is because those are the events that they're tracking anyways. That's not the event that the marketing team chose to tag at some point, or the user acquisition team chose to tag. No, that was the events that the product team or the merchant team, whatever, have. Those are obviously things that need to be tracked. So it's like, oh, well, we already have that data, so let's use it. And again, in many cases, I think that can be the best thing to optimize towards. But for us, it's a combination of signals. It's a little bit of a secret sauce. Not that if I disclosed it, it'd be like, oh, well, that's the answer. No, it's going to be different for every business. And so if you try to copy this, that's probably a better approach, even if you're in the same vertical. But you have to obviously come up with something that's an early indicator. And again, similar to attribution, it's not like, oh, we nailed it. We found it. We got the silver bullet. This is something that changes over time, that you retest, that you adapt, that you learn, you get better at.
Certainly, that all makes sense. This is all very interesting, Adam. So I know you've explained how you guys evaluate all of your offline and online channels. Do you guys consider methodologies like multitouch attribution or econometric models? Do you evaluate such techniques, or how do you think about those things?
You could say what we're doing today is like a rudimentary version of that. But yeah, that's where we're looking to go, and putting more and more data science behind this is kind of our plan. We're not there today. I would be lying if I said we had, the world's most sophisticated attribution model in place, but we know the inputs. At least we feel pretty good about that. Any data scientists listening, I should mention we are at Current hiring pretty aggressively here in New York City.
Yeah, we will link to your hiring pages, certainly. Excellent, Adam. That's so fascinating. I know we are coming up on time, so this is perhaps a good place for us to start to wrap up. But before we do that, can you tell folks how they can find out more about you and everything you do?
Yeah, most importantly, check out current.com. Even better, current.com/careers. That's my main plug. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on all that stuff, but Current's far more interesting than.
Excellent. Current.com/careers. And of course, we will link to Adam's LinkedIn, Twitter just as well. Adam, it's an honor having you. Thank you for being a guest on the Mobile User Acquisition Show.
Thank you so much, Shimon. Keep this going. Again, this is how I get smarter, listening to people on here.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you.
For more tips, pointers, and strategies from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here, or check out our blog, rocketship.hq.com/blog.